And we are live. So hello and welcome, my friends, to episode 4 of Stories from the Path. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule tonight. And especially thank you to Wendy, not just for giving of herself tonight, but for the preparation that she did in getting ready for this interview. And it's been such a wonderful and joyous opportunity to have the conversations that I've had with Wendy along the way and get to know each other a lot better and get ready for this program. The conversations I've had with Wendy have been some of the most eye-opening that I've had in all of my pre-interviews, and it's really been quite wonderful. So bear with me a second here. I want to just go to mute all. I didn't do that yet, and I want to block out the background noise real quick. Yeah. Perfect. So we are all muted as well. So in a minute, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how I got started on the path to creating this show called Story from the Path. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit more about the format for the show. So this format is to be a 60-minute interview and conversation. During that time, it'll be mostly Wendy and I that are doing the talking. There will be a question and answer period or a comment period at the end where you can either ask a direct question or you can just comment about the experience or something in particular that you had that resonated with you during the course of the conversation. Either way, we'll have a hard ending time of not later than 8:15, so you know you can get back onto the rest of your evenings, although I have typically found that we do stay pretty close to the timeline of being done right at 8 o'clock. In the first 3 episodes of this show, I have taken some time at the beginning to talk a little bit about how this got started, or maybe a little story about what led me to get started here. In the first 2 episodes, I talked about how infinite possibilities came into my life and introduced me to so many of the people that I've worked with over the last couple of years. And in the 3rd episode of this show, I talked about how Mike Dooley himself set me on the path to interviewing people by sort of accidentally having me interview him at the last Train the Trainer seminar. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how my awakening to the concept of people pairing up and working with others can be doubly powerful in our world as humanity continues its shift. And over the last 2 years in particular, I've explored a lot of paths that I never thought I'd explore in this lifetime. And many of those paths, not most of them, have been direct tributaries of the river of infinite possibilities. With the encouragement of the director of training for Total Unique Thoughts, Regina Garapi, I began moderating men's forums about a year ago. And despite the fact that my wife and I had been teaching workshops for over 2 years, despite the fact that I'd been teaching and speaking professionally by myself for over a year, I had a lot of fear attached to the idea of trying to run any sort of recurring men's or any type of forum on a monthly basis. I really wasn't sure why or anybody would even want to listen to my message. And I'm sure some of you spiritual teachers and people who speak out there have that same fear that nobody really wants to hear your message. Compounding that matter was the fact that for years I'd been telling myself that I didn't have the technical ability to do any sort of video broadcasting. I knew nothing about computers. In fact, when my wife Christiana suggested to me earlier this year that we start expanding our internet presence, I think I promptly said that I didn't think the internet was a good way to connect with people and it could really only happen in person. And here we are like 25 webinars later in October, and the universe has taught me quite a lesson, or rather, shall I say, given me the opportunity for a significant awakening. But back to the story at hand, what I decided to do to help me alleviate my concern of having to present a topic each month was I decided to seek out like-minded individuals who would be a part of the forum with me on a monthly basis, could share a piece of their own expertise. And over those next few months of that men's forum, I found some really cool people to work with, and they helped me get this thing started. It got me in the groove of interviewing writers, authors, teachers each month, getting ready for a broadcast each month. Not to mention that it helped me get to know some really cool people a lot closer along the way, which has been a huge magical serendipity in the process. So about 6 months ago, I got the idea to try to do a more in-depth interview, a more focused 1-hour interview with someone that was a part of my life, that had a really important story that was worthy of sharing both live and being recorded for future review. And that's how I came to the realization that I wanted to do this show called Stories from the Path. And in this show, we have the opportunity to hear big pieces of one person's story. And the great thing about listening to other people's stories is when we do that, we come to the realization that we're all the same. We all have desires, we all have journeys, we all have challenges, awakenings, we all reach some level of contentment, And then we all have new desires because we're not satisfied and we want more. And it led me to think a lot about the past and reading A Hero's Journey with Joseph Campbell. And that's become a big part of our curriculum, if you will, for Christiana and I as we go forward as teachers and coaching about how to reclaim your own story, how to tell your story, how to become a better speaker, et cetera, et cetera. So the journey we're embarking on tonight for the next 55 minutes is the culmination of 2 years of preparation, meeting, and opportunity. So I'd like to officially welcome you to Stories from the Path, episode 4, with my friend, Wendy Doherty. So hello, Wendy. How you doing? We'll get to you in just a second. I want to introduce you first, though, of course. So if you spend even a little bit of time using social media in the IP community, you undoubtedly have already had some sort of contact with Wendy. Wendy is always quick to like your positive comments. She's often the first person to read and comment on your own blog. She's a never-ending presence of support and love to those who've been lucky enough to cross her path. Wendy spent the lion's share of her working years in jobs that were focused on teaching and helping other people find healing. And along the way, she's had a lifetime of experiences, collected countless stories about contrast, perseverance, trust, love, and I look forward to helping her share some of those stories with you here tonight. For now, Wendy is semi-retired from the daily going to workforce, and she's looking forward to focusing more of her attention on her own writing and storytelling, which some of you may have had the opportunity to enjoy on Facebook. She's recently retooled her home office, where she's speaking to us now from, to get some more of that southern exposure sun in her Michigan winter snowbelt state. And in the days and months ahead, Wendy looks forward to churning out more stories about her own experience and her own survival, so we can be inspired to persevere in our own lives. So please help me officially welcome to the show, Wendy, and I'm going to unmute Wendy now, and we're going to get rolling and talk a little bit with Wendy tonight. Welcome, Wendy. So glad to have you.
Thank you.
So Wendy, you and I first crossed paths in Chicago at the Infinite Possibilities Train the Trainer conference in August of 2014, but we really didn't get to know each other during that conference. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you coming to Chicago.
Well, when I left and got on the train, and I thought I was really cool, I was going to my daily, workshop. I got off the train and handled the depot and everything okay, but I just was not prepared for the mob scene. And I could be introverted, I can be extroverted, I can be a combination. Lo and behold, it didn't take long and I just froze and I had a really hard time. I mean, I loved the things I was hearing, but there were so many people giving hugs, and more hugs. And I think it was Jonathan Benjamin who gave me the most incredible, endearing hug. And it was like we had taken a break and I walked back in and they were giving hugs out. I know Appio was dressed up. And Jonathan gave me this hug and it was like, it was different. It was as if he was honoring me, but he was also reading me that I was a tad uncomfortable with all these people. So I had a very shy presence at that seminar.
So one of the reasons you came to Train the Trainer in Chicago is because it was close to where you live, and that was an easy reason for it to make it doable for you. So you live in southwestern Michigan. Tell us a little bit, give us a little background on the community that you've lived in for pretty much your entire life.
It's halfway. I was born and raised in Kalamazoo, which is halfway between Chicago and Detroit. If you drew a line straight across, you'd hit Kalamazoo. I live in Portage, which touches up to Kalamazoo. It's just this rivalry between Kalamazoo and Portage, and which is a separate, unimportant story. We moved to Portage when our daughter was in first grade because they have an excellent school system, and our daughter is a product of that excellent school system. So we've lived here for over 30 years.
Awesome. So when you say we know that Wendy's been married to the same man for over 40 years now, right? Your husband,
yes,
Larry.
43 years. 43
years now. Now, you told me that when you first met Larry on that first day, it wasn't necessarily love at first sight, was it?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't actually a date. It was right after Christmas, and we were going to a Youth for Christ convention in Niagara Falls. And they were taking two vans, and the brand new van that they bought broke down. So they were right outside of Niagara Falls, and he was in that van. I was in the new van and he was in the old van. And so we stopped for lunch and we had to double team tables. And my friends introduced me to him. They said, oh, you have to wait till you meet him. You're just going to love him. Mm-hmm. And I met him and he had long hair, a plastic bow tie. I don't know why. A hat. I mean, he looked like a character out of a novel. Mm-hmm. And I thought he was obnoxious. And then when we had dinner that night, we sat at the same table and I was sure he was obnoxious. So we had a good time at the convention, but riding home, we rode home in the same van, and I got to know him and I got to see his spirit, that he had a gentle spirit. And I find that personally in a man a much more attractive characteristic than this macho, bravado kind of thing. So I saw a side of him and we began a friendship, and then I pursued him and we got engaged and got married. So. And
your courtship was relatively quick, wasn't it?
Very quick, yes. Yes.
You had met in the early part of 73, if I'm not mistaken?
We actually met in 72.
Okay, but you were married by the fall of 73.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's a quick courtship. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for us, we just knew. It's like some people will spend a lifetime looking for that, not just that significant other, but that truly that soulmate. And I knew Larry was my soulmate.
Absolutely. So I know you've had a number of different, and I referenced your career, jobs throughout your years, and we'll talk a little bit later, a little bit more about how your education and your careers overlap. But shortly before you were married, shortly after you were married, you took your first real job, you told me, and that was working as a lunchroom aide at an elementary school. Is that correct?
Yes.
Real job.
It was just near our apartment. Mm-hmm. And I met this little girl. I mean, I really don't like children all that much. And most of them would go off and play and leave me alone, and I would supervise them. But this little girl who was just adorable came up to me, and her name was Christy. And I was just so enamored with her intellect, her communication skills. And I remember saying to God, I want a little girl just like that. Mm-hmm. That is our daughter's namesake. And for years, she donned the same haircut, much to her chagrin. My Christy hated that, but she had those same qualities. Yeah. And adults love to be around our Christy because.
So one might say very early on, you said to God, if you will, that, you'd love to have a girl just like Christy. So that was one of the first examples of thoughts become things in your life.
Yes, I also had this thought that God wouldn't dare give me a boy. So, I mean, I was naive. I was young. But, right. And, when it came time for her birth, what mattered was it was a healthy baby. But right. Deep in my heart of hearts, and only God knew what was in there, I wanted a girl.
Absolutely. So for the first 10 years or the next 10 years of your life, I guess, quick marriage. Christy came about 10 months later, you said, right?
A year
later. And then, for those first 10 years, you told me that you pretty much doubled as a stay-at-home mom and a volunteer worker for the most.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so, we felt that was important, that Christy be raised by one of us.
Yeah. And one of the reasons you wanted to spend the majority of your time creating a very healthy environment for Christy to grow up in is because you were not afforded that same privilege necessarily.
That's true. I was raised in an alcoholic home, and I'm the youngest of 3 children, so it's a different experience for each of the 3 children.
Yeah. So you said your father was the alcoholic and your mother was the codependent.
Yes, that's true. My father was a pharmacist. He was educated as a pharmacist after World War II during the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. And my mother was a nurse, and they got married when the war ended. He finished school, moved back to Kalamazoo, and his father owned a pharmacy. His father wasn't a pharmacist, but he owned a pharmacy. And his father was an alcoholic. And I think my mother just loved my father so much that she just loved him with her entire being. And so she would enable him rather than fight him on things.
Yeah. So you were about 6 or 7 when you started to piece together the fact that things weren't quite totally normal in your home then?
Right. The summer, well, it was actually the summer before that. We were going to rent this little red cottage at a lake about a half an hour's drive west of Kalamazoo. And what I didn't know at the time was he was actually having an affair with someone, and during that time was deciding whether he was going to leave or whether he was going to stay. And I didn't know those pieces. But I can remember we would stay at the cottage all week. He would drive back to Kalamazoo and work in the pharmacy, and then he would come back for the weekend. Mm-hmm. And so we would hear our mother crying inside the cottage a lot of times. And I would ask my older sister what was going on, but she always had a sentence, you know, like, I don't know, yeah, right, or never mind, or, you know, she just didn't.
6 years older than you, so she had a pretty good awareness. Yeah.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
You said one of the things that sort of tipped you off to your dad's level of alcohol consumption, or the fact that maybe that wasn't normal, is that he used to bring boxes of liquor home for weekend trips and getaways and things of that nature.
Right. My father, when he owned the pharmacy and built the cottage, he devised a schedule where we would be going every other day to the cottage, but we'd be spending the night. Mm-hmm. And if it was a long weekend, he might have like from Friday through Monday off and go back to work Tuesday. So then he'd take more alcohol than if we were just going for the one night. Mm-hmm. And if he were going to take a vacation, he would have, you knew it was a long vacation by the amount of boxes that he had.
Right. You said on one occasion, either a neighbor or an associate came up to him in town and said, "Oh, you must be having a party?"
Mm-hmm. Yes, she was actually a woman who was the star of a woman's talk show locally. Oh. And her name was Louise Carver, and she was also very involved in the arts. And she came up to him and she said, "Someone's having a party." And I thought, oh, that's cool. Louise Carver is talking to us, you know. And my dad goes, "No, just going to the lake." And I thought, I was young, but I thought that was probably not a smart thing to say, you know.
Yeah, maybe especially for a 6 or a 7-year-old girl, a little unusual or even embarrassing for one of the first times to be in that situation where you're recognizing that that's that unusual. So obviously, we'll get more into this as the conversation proceeds, but a lot of times with alcohol comes, aggression, anger, abuse, etc. You told me that at times or on a specific time, you woke up in the middle of the night and your dad was chasing your mom around the house with a horsewhip that he owned.
Yes, that's true. It was a true horsewhip, not a toy. It was the real thing. And I don't know where it came from, how it was just like always under my mom's bed. Mm-hmm. And I just do remember the night that he was chasing her, because you could hear, has a very distinct sound. And again, I asked my sister what was going on, and she said, "I don't know, go back to sleep."
Right. So did that event that you recall occur at the Little Red Cottage or in the summer, or was that happening in your family home?
If my memory serves me correct, and I have a pretty good memory, it was after we had come home, but before he left to go. He did leave us. He left us for 3 to 4 months. He did come back. Mm-hmm. Which would make you think, oh, he came back at Christmas time. He was supposed to come back and watch us, and ended up, we were told that he was staying, which was really good news in the moment. But as I look back on our life, I feel like we paid quite a price for that reunion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said that you could sort of, as you got older, you could sort of identify whether or not there might be a bottle of gin in the box.
Oh yeah. I looked at alcohol. I looked over what was in there. I did my own inventory, and I looked for bottled gin because it's bottled a little differently. I mean, gin and vodka are similar, but gin, it's clear compared to the other things he was bringing. And I knew from one of his flare-ups, which a flare-up is really not the strong enough word. It was a very intense call the police kind of episode. And my mother mentioned that my dad only acted that way when he had gin. So I learned to be on the lookout for gin bottles. And gin bottles occurred always on vacations. So that's when I would, my radar went up for gin bottles.
So if you guys were leaving for a long weekend at the cottage or a vacation week, for example, you're looking through the box and you know how things are going to go based on whether or not there's gin in that box.
Yeah, the vacation was like 3 weeks. It was never 1 week. Okay. And so that you knew you were going to spend 2 weeks of his alcoholism being out of control. Mm-hmm. A lot of scary, anxious, threatening moments, and you'll have 1 week of close to normalcy.
Mm. Okay, makes sense.
And that was always the last week before he went back to work.
So you mentioned that your father was a pharmacist. He carried on, his father's business, who owned the pharmacy. But your dad made a career change.
Yes.
Around age 35 or 40?
I'm not sure how old he was. I was in elementary school, like 4th grade. 5th grade.
Okay, so you're about 10 at this point.
Yes, exactly. He sold the pharmacy and he went into law enforcement. He was in the Army. He was in the Judge Advocate General's office and he loved police work. So he used to do ride-alongs with the sheriff's department after he closed the pharmacy. And he had developed good friendships, so he went to work as a deputy and worked his way up to a seasoned detective. Mm-hmm.
So you said that the transition, though, wasn't necessarily so smooth. You said that sort of selling the pharmacy at times even brought out a meaner streak in him.
It did, especially when he sold it and made this decision. I mean, that was a weekend where we feared for our lives. And mm-hmm. I remember, being sent to bed and then hearing my father threatening to kill my mother. And I mean, I truly believed he meant it. He was authority in our family. I had every reason to think he meant it. Mm-hmm. Then my sister got home a little later and we shared a bedroom and she could see I was upset. And it was the entire weekend. It was, he sent us back to the cottage to check on it. And when we went back to school that following Monday, my mother said there was no reason for us to tell anybody what had happened. And no one called the police, but my sister was trying to figure out a way to break out of our bedroom to go to a neighbor and call the police, who was a police officer. And it's just got really ugly. It's hard to describe if you weren't there.
I can believe it's hard to describe. We'll talk more about your dad and his battle with alcohol and his battle with you and the family a bit more in a few minutes, but I want to shift gears again, and I want to talk about a period in time when you were graduated from high school, just before you had the chance to meet your obnoxious love of your life, Larry. And
yes.
You said earlier that your mom had gone to nursing school, so
right.
There was sort of this even presumption or hope or wish that you might follow in that same path, yes?
What it was there were 2 hospitals locally, and my mother went to one of the nursing schools locally, and it's called Bronson is the name of the hospital. And when I was born, the doctor laid me on her stomach and said, "Shall I enroll her in nurses training?" Mm-hmm. Well, I would take that as just a comment, but my mother took that as this is now, epiphany, and I have to make sure this happens. I never wanted to be a nurse, but the only thing my mother would support me in was nursing. So anytime I tried to look at areas that interested me, she would not be supportive. And the more I tried, the less supportive she got. And I just kind of gave up because my father had to fill out some financial aid forms, even though we knew he made too much money. And it was like the way he dealt with that was he ran out and got a bottle of whiskey. Normally he would send my mother. So he was so mad he just drove himself. And I just got this message, back off going to school, back off. Whatever it is, you're upsetting both of them.
Yeah. So, and you were most interested at that point in something related to the law or psychology, correct?
Actually, something that would have included law and medical together. Mm-hmm. So that might have been forensics, for example.
But at that time in the 60s for, right? This was now
70s,
late,
early
early
70s.
70s. There wasn't a lot of wiggle room for women to pursue careers in Middle Michigan. And
No, the counselor that I talked with at the community college said I would never find a job, that law enforcement doesn't hire women.
Mm-hmm.
He said I would be better off to be a nurse or a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So I was irritated with him because, again, it's just like everybody wants me to be this nurse, but I have no desire.
So you failed your nursing exams, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And that was either
Twice.
On purpose or a magical serendipity, one of the other.
Both. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but somewhere along the way, then you did form that idea of maybe pursuing the career of physician's assistant, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you said to me that was more appealing to you because then you'd be able to give orders instead of having to follow them.
Well, that was my, sarcastic way. But in terms of my mother said, we were watching like a doctor show and they were wearing high heels. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I can't wait to wear high heels with my nursing uniform. And my mother said, you're not wearing high heels. You don't wear high heels. I'm like, I can't wear high heels. I don't want to be a nurse, I mean, I was a little child, but the point was I wanted to serve in a different capacity, meaning where a higher level of responsibility.
Yes, absolutely.
And that came out translated like I wanted to give the orders. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to see blood, I might as well be the doctor, be paid for more.
Right. So you had a number of different transitions in and out of work and school throughout your early adulthood and mid-adulthood, but you did eventually go on to earn a degree, correct? Mm-hmm. You earned a degree. Did you say it was in management of organizational development? Or
yes. Yeah, that's it.
Did I actually get that right?
Yes.
Woo-hoo.
Yes.
And that was from a local college in the Kalamazoo area, right? That you went to?
Yeah, well, it was actually Spring Arbor College, which is over by Flint, but they had a satellite campus in Battle Creek. So after work, I was working full time. Mm-hmm. After work, I would go one night a week, and it was an accelerated course. So you would go through a couple of textbooks in a month. And
you actually graduated magna cum laude, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
There's a little bit of an interesting story about that, isn't there? About the visualization practice. Tell us that story about visualizing.
I was at the school at the satellite campus for my interview, and I had to write a part of the entrance exam was you had to write because they didn't do any testing. Everything was written. And I was looking at pictures on a bulletin board, and I was asking the person who I was meeting with, what are these cords wrapped around their neck? And she said, those are honor cords. Mm-hmm. You get one for this level. This person had two, and that was magna cum. And I said, plan on ordering those for me because I'm going to earn those. Mm-hmm. And I did. Yeah. And I was the only one in my class who did. So it was a big deal.
Go you, Wendy. Nicely done. The one thing about survivors, it seems, is both in good times and bad times, they can visualize what they need to, and they can get themselves to a better place when they want to. So speaking about good times and bad times, one of the worst times for you was at about age 10, and we've talked about it a little bit. It was a time when your dad was changing careers, and you referenced it a little while ago about your father literally threatening to kill your mother.
Right.
Take us back to that scene, if you will, and just sort of describe to us a little bit about what was happening in that episode.
Well, what is significant is what was happening before that episode, only in that it was all behavior changes in him. And however my mother would respond to him, it was never the right response. Mm-hmm. So that was like, okay, when you live with an alcoholic parent, you walk on eggshells, mm-hmm. and you can almost smell in the air something is going afoul. Mm-hmm. And that's what I picked up on. I mean, it was very, have strong feelings, strong senses. And so my father was very angry, and even my mother took me aside and said, don't stay out of his way. He's very mad. Mm-hmm. And that just was not a word my mother used.
Mm-hmm. So your sister at that point was out with her boyfriend, I think you said?
Yes,
And so
yes.
she was coming home and he was kind of going there to confront her on the porch.
Yeah, well, just telling her to kiss her boyfriend and come back in the house.
Yeah.
And that was unusual for him to do that. And she came into the bedroom and I was bawling, and then my father threatened my mother again, and then I just totally started bawling, and she comforted me first, and I fell asleep at some point, but at some point I woke up and my mother was in the room, and she was talking with my sister and defending my father and saying it was the stress of selling the drugstore and starting at the sheriff's department.
She was enabling his behavior,
Yes.
apologizing for his behavior, and,
Right.
and sort of enabling him to continue on that path. So you got sent to the cottage again then, and
Yes.
and you said you went there with your sister, your brother, and your mother, and your sister's boyfriend, Dan. Is that correct?
Yes.
You said Dan usually made you feel safe when he was around.
Yeah.
Tell us about
Yeah.
that a little bit.
He just, you just meet people. I think part of it was whenever there was an outside person in our home, I felt safer.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe it was a trust that they wouldn't let anything happen that shouldn't happen. I'm not really sure. I mean, he just was more of a listener and comforter to my sister.
Right. So you, and speaking about that, it wasn't so easy though to have your friends over to your house.
No, there was a lot more than just the drinking. I mean, sometimes my father would be partially clothed. You know, if he passed out and he woke up, he might walk in your bedroom partially dressed. I mean, you never knew what was going to happen. And if it's a weekend, it's downtime, it's drinking time.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't let people into that. You just don't trust. How do you trust that this friend won't turn their back?
So you sort of devised a little strategy to figure out what the safer times were to have friends over.
Yeah, I did. As my father grew in the ranks, and he was very successful in law enforcement, but he would be on call, and he would be the detective on call for an entire weekend. And I knew that was a pretty safe time because he wouldn't be drinking
Mm-hmm.
or not drinking as much. I mean, he's not supposed to be drinking at all, but I'm sure there were times.
Absolutely. And you said he kind of kept it with the governor at those points where like he could at least, your mom could sober him up enough that he could get to work if necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have a copy of his on-call schedule then, or you would refer to his schedule.
I knew where it was kept, and I would look it over every month when it came out. And
Mm-hmm.
I would also, verbally ask my mother, is Dad working this weekend? Or, I had my own ways of investigating. Absolutely. And I did.
So when you were about 16 or in that age range, you had to put your family dog to sleep, correct?
Yes.
So
yes.
That was Taffy, right?
Yes. They got Taffy 3 months before I was born.
And
so he was my protector.
A Cocker Spaniel, and so it was your companion for your whole life.
Right.
And you said Taffy was your protector.
Yeah. I mean, Taffy would not, first and foremost, Taffy was my dad's buddy. So, if my dad was disciplining us, Taffy's not going to get involved.
Right.
But he would sleep under my crib. He used to sleep in my bed in that way. So
when Taffy was put to sleep, or you let go of Taffy, you decided to ask for a puppy. Yes. I asked at Christmas time. I was my first year of high school. Mm-hmm. And I really regretted it because my father, he got a dog, but I didn't know that my father took to disciplining dogs in a very serious, almost mean-like fashion, and he would always do it when he was drinking. So everything was exacerbated with the drinking. And to me, the acts that he did were just downright cruel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and he felt the only way to really teach a dog discipline was the same way he kind of held power over his family with fear. Right. And I did challenge him one time during that Christmas break. I don't know what it was.
my dad threw something at the dog because the dog didn't come or she didn't do something. And I stood up for the dog. And I said, how would you like it if you were a young, innocent puppy and someone threw that at you? And he wouldn't talk to me for 3 days because I defended the dog. So I became that dog's protector. If he was really bombed out and, you know, he might just start calling her in the middle of the night to see if she would come to test her. Mm-hmm. I would do everything I could to walk behind the dog and get her to, so she would get to him, and then he'd, you know, let up. And it was just very stressful.
So to say that growing up in your home was a little bit like walking on eggshells is a quite literal translation.
It is, only under those eggshells are bombs that might go off. So it's, you know, fully loaded.
Yeah. So as a teenager then, at this age in your life, you obviously would take occasion to go out once in a while with your friends. And what was it like when you came home? Like, you know, describe or share with us the emotions of being a 16-year-old girl coming home to who knows what.
Right. Well, I could, you know, you walk in the front door and I start getting a reading, and you had to walk by my dad's leather chair to get to our bedroom. So I might say hi. I might see if he's, you know, got that dazed look in his eye, or if he's asleep. If he's asleep, I don't say anything. Sometimes he might say hi to me. You know, if he were on call, he would probably say hi to me. Mm-hmm. It just kind of depended. I mean, I would know if he was on call, but it just kind of depended. He just kind of got into the stupor when he was drinking, and he could go silly, he could go mean. It just depended.
Yeah. So fast forward to the time when your daughter's about, I guess, 8 or 9 now, and your dad dies in 1982, correct?
Yeah, she was actually 7 when she
7. Okay.
Died. Yeah.
And what sort of relationship did your daughter Christy have with your dad?
Interesting. Well, I protected her. I protected her from holidays because I used to call holidays holidays. Mm-hmm. And so we stopped going to the family Christmas. We would see my parents separately, but I tried to time it to when it correlated to call schedule or during the week, during an evening. One day we were just eating dinner, and out of the blue, my daughter said, I wonder if Grandpa is an alcoholic. I thought that was pretty, you know, I mean, she was pretty bright, but she was able to talk to him. Like, if he snapped at my mother, which he did all the time, she would go up to him and tell him to knock that off, that wasn't nice. Mm-hmm. And he would let her into that space. And he wouldn't laugh, but he would smirk or smile. Mm-hmm. And so they had this mutual respect, and, you know, she wouldn't put up with anything for him. And, you know, he listened to her. Mm-hmm.
In a way that he never listened to you.
Exactly.
Your sister, your mom at all.
Correct. Yeah.
And she had 2 cousins that were about the same age, correct?
Right. Yes.
So
yes.
All 3 kids were born within a year of each other. All 3 of your parents.
They were born within 6 weeks of each other.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So was she the only one of the grandkids that had the nature of that relationship with him?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting that's gone on. So the last time you saw your father was around the holidays then in that year, correct?
It was Christmas Day of 1981. And we went over later in the day. He had his first heart attack the year before, or in the January before. And we went over, after we had our family Christmas, I knew if we went over later in the day, he'd probably be passed out and in bed. So we aimed for later in the day. And walked in the house. He came out of the bedroom and he glared at me. And he turned around and he went back in the bedroom. And that's the last time I ever saw him.
Mm. And so he had a heart attack about a year before he died. Mm-hmm. And you told me that his father also had died of a heart attack. There's sort of a interesting sort of parallelism with those 2 stories.
My father's father died at the age of 58 of a fatal heart attack in the month of January, around the 3rd week of January. Mm-hmm. My father had his first heart attack at the age of 58, the third week of January. Now, remember, he's a pharmacist, so you expect he's going to be very proactive, but he wasn't. And he was afraid of having a heart cath back in the 80s. So he lived that whole year worrying if he would outlive his father. And he died on the same day at the age of 59 from a heart attack.
On the same day.
Yep.
Wow. Pretty amazing stuff.
And in Chicago, when we were at that seminar, do you remember when we had an exercise where we were at a table and we had to tell a story?
Yes.
Or give an example of thoughts become things?
Yeah.
That's what I used. That's because I thought that was such a great example of thoughts become things.
Yeah, and it's not always in the positive direction. That's
true.
Yeah. So I want to go, as we get down into these last 10 minutes or so, I want to go to the period in time when you were working in the healthcare field, and the name of the place you were working for
Spectrum Health.
Spectrum Health, thank you. I was drawing a blank on that right now. So, that started as a somewhat interesting situation and that you were helping other people, but over time it sort of evolved into a high stress, as you said, I think in your words, glorified gopher position. Tell us a little bit about that whole period.
I worked at Spectrum Health for 12 years, and I worked as a intensive care unit secretary, which is the equivalent of air traffic controller in an airport. You make sure things are running, things are scheduled, everything flows smoothly. And in ICU, things can change in the blink of an eye. So what you had planned 10 minutes ago, maybe thrown out the door. So it's high stress all the time. It's chaotic. And there was always a rumor that the day would come when physicians would put their own orders in. I was entering physician orders in the computer, which means I had to decipher their writing.
Right.
I had to decipher I had developed critical thinking skills. Does this order make sense with everything else that's going on? So the day did come where they taught physicians how to put their own orders in, and our jobs changed. They didn't want to lay us off, but they created jobs that felt very meaningless. And I stuck it out as long as I could. In 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I did go back to work after I was done with my treatment, but my commute was 56 miles, and I felt that was too much stress. I couldn't handle the stressful commute, the stressful job, and the breast cancer. So the job went.
And you just let go of it, basically.
I just walked in one day. I did not plan to leave that day. I just walked in and said, I think this is the day to let it go.
Absolutely. So you are now a 4-year survivor of breast cancer.
Yes, I am.
Congratulations. And you've done some writing and some volunteer work with others that have been diagnosed or have been treated for breast cancer, but you'd like to do a lot more going forward.
Yes, I would. Absolutely. I believe that thoughts become things is crucial to our health. And I think that could be applied so well in the lives of someone diagnosed with breast cancer.
Absolutely.
Thoughts become things. What are the first things you think about when you get breast cancer? Am I going to die? Am I going to die? Am I going to die? So you're telling this like 500 times a day. You're wondering if you're going to die. Are you going to live? Are you going to lose your hair? And I think, you learn to prioritize. Okay, if I can keep my life, I'll lose my hair. But if I truly believe if we taught those diagnosed with breast cancer to focus on 3 good things every day, and the minute they started to feel that anxiety creep in, focus on those 3 good things, I believe that would impact their health in a positive way.
Absolutely. And I think you said it to me is you said that take that beast on and knock it down by thinking 3 good thoughts a day.
Exactly. And that's just one example of using thoughts become things. Take your infinite possibilities. Dare to dream big. Dare to believe you will kick this beast. You ask, believe, and receive. There's no reason to not ask, to not believe, and not receive.
Absolutely. And so you've been, in the, let's say the last 10 years of your life, but in particular, the last couple, on the quest to understand more of this power, understand more of our thoughts become things, and to just let things evolve a little bit more.
Right. You do see with some survivors, they do develop what we call a victim's mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And they get stuck here. And it's not that they want to be there, but they just can't lift their feet out. And I think those are the people that we really need to help, because to propel them forward is to give them a chance.
Absolutely. Was there was there like sort of a fork in the road or a watershed moment in your own treatment where you made the mental transition from I'm so afraid I'm gonna die to the place where you said, oh my God, I'm gonna live? Was there a moment in time that you can identify?
I never thought I was going to die. I was never worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
I found humor in my radiation treatment. I didn't find any humor in the surgery, but in the radiation treatment, I had what I call the A-team. And I had the same group of technicians every time I went. And I was going every day for like 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And, one time you have to hold these horrendous poses. And the computer went down. So they said what normally is a 3-minute pose turned out to be 13 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, am I going to get a discount for this? Or, you just start doing humor. So every day they looked forward to me coming in, and I look forward to going there, because they would make me smile and make me laugh. And for that amount of time, I wasn't thinking about that. And during this time, I was also doing as much research as I could get my hands on and eating. And when you've got a cancer that's active in your body, what power do we have to turn that off?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in the quest for answers that we follow in our lifetime, we do try to find some means of closure a lot of times. Would you say that you've had any sense of closure with your father, with your mother? I know that we talked about it once in a workshop you and I were doing together about a poem that you had wrote. But I mean, tell us where you're at energetically, mentally at this moment in time with your perception of your father, your perception of your mother.
During the past year, I just couldn't quite let it all go. And I mean, it's something I've tried, I don't know how many times to let it go, but it always kind of comes back. And this year, starting probably in January, I started having these really bad dreams. And they were horrible dreams about the way my mother was treating me. And I was a little girl. It's around the time my father left. Mm-hmm. And I have this realization, these are suppressed memories from childhood, that yes, my mother beat me. My mother threw me across the floor because I was in her way. And all of a sudden, I just had this light go off that I didn't deserve that. Mm-hmm. That was, I don't want to say her issue. It was her issue, but I didn't deserve that. There was nothing wrong with me. I was not the damaged goods that my mother presented when she introduced me. Mm-hmm. And I guess as far as my father goes, I think I've had more time to work with my father's, how that relationship fits. And I guess I can sum it up best. He was well known throughout the community. So when he died, his funeral was huge and long and everything, and a lot of kudos, 24/7 honor guard. And 10 years after he died, I wrote a letter to the prosecuting attorney asking if I could meet him, that my father thought very highly of him. And I remembered a letter that the prosecutor wrote to my mother when my father died, saying what a great detective he was, how he taught him everything he knew about law enforcement. And it was at that meeting when I was done, I knew that if my father and I, if we were just two people, two random people, and we met on the street going to our jobs, I knew I would like him. Mm. And so I was able to at least separate the working man from the father and the husband. Even though we paid, I would say, a price for his success, there was still an aspect I could find that I liked about him. So I was able to focus on that.
Absolutely. So you're a survivor in that you survived growing up in a physically abusive home. You're a survivor in that you are 4 years removed from surviving breast cancer. What would you say to someone who's facing a similar circumstance in their life about finding hope?
We are faced with challenges where we think it's impossible to find hope. And it is at that moment we have to believe more than ever that hope does exist. And I do believe that where there is love, there is hope. I think if you can learn to find a little piece of light and let it in, like if you think of a vase that's cracked, and we talk about the light coming through the cracks, that's the vessel. If you can take this mother who's got a lot of issues and very cracked, there are still some redeeming qualities in this woman, in this man, in this experience. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person because my parents were that way. In fact, it's been brought up to me by a couple of people that I actually have remarkable strength, and I never thought of that. I never would have used that word to describe me. So we are stronger than we think we are, and I really believe that's true. And if, breast cancer will teach you that you are stronger than you think, and you're braver than you think. And that's huge. And maybe I needed that experience, not so much, maybe it was using that experience that I will use to help other people in any kind of situation, whether it's child abuse, domestic abuse. There are threads of similarity throughout there. And if you have breast cancer and you're taking on the victim's stance, then you're falling into that same thinking.
Absolutely. So, and you'd said to me just yesterday when we were having our last conversation before tonight's interview, you had said that although you didn't necessarily prefer having to go through either of these two situations, that in some ways you were actually grateful for them because it created an empathy in you that made you who you are now and is helping you awaken that sort of divine ultimate purpose in you. So what is next for you? What is your ultimate purpose?
I know it involves compassion, and I was compassion before this ever started. I was born that way. That's a light, I think, that I have. But I need to take this to the masses somehow, this message. Any of these messages, my mind can't decide which one's more important, children, people with breast cancer. But I think children need to hear this. If you're coming from an alcoholic parent, or if you have a sibling who is sexually abusing you, you need to have an outlet. You need to have a safe place where you can go, and you need to discover that it's okay to find and use your voice.
Well, you've certainly found and started to use your voice, and for all the careers that you were pursuing as a youth and throughout your adulthood, I think we found that your career as teacher, and we're very grateful to listen to you speak because it teaches us all. So that's it for our interview and our conversation tonight. And it was even more remarkable than I hoped it would be. I just can't thank you enough for your time and effort and just for being open and sharing these powerful stories of your life with us. So moving on to a couple of announcements to wrap things up. We'll be looking forward to our next, some people joined us for a program called Possibilities and Manifestations in August to celebrate the International Infinite Possibilities Day. I'm currently looking at doing another program related to storytelling on possibilities, and I think I'm going to do something with possibilities about communications with the other side of the veil, because so many people have wonderful stories in that regard. So I'm looking to put a date on the calendar for that. We should have information on that in the next week or so. Also in August, I launched a program with Mark Offenbacher, who's with us tonight, and it was called Discovering Acceptance and Finding Peace. We're excited to announce that we have another workshop coming up on Wednesday, October 26th, and we'll be releasing details at the end of this week about that workshop. For the last 6 months, I've been working with Appio Hunter, and he is a wonderfully talented healer and teacher. There's a monthly workshop called The Principles of Joy. Our next program for that is on October 19th. And as I mentioned in the intro, my ongoing men's circles continue on the first Monday of every month. If you know anybody who's interested in that, please reach out to me. I'm going to start a new men's circle in another month or two and get another group going, so I have some room for that for people from your community. And last but certainly not least, I'm excited to announce that episode 5 from Stories for the Path is ready to get going in October, in November. In October, right? And I will be working with Mark Offenbacher, who I've worked with on a number of occasions. We'll have an in-depth hour to talk about Mark's program. Mark is a teacher and a life coach that focuses on the importance of having a healthy body so we can have a healthy life, and his stories and his experience are profound. That episode will air on Monday, October 24th at 7 p.m. So yes, indeed, that is a interesting week for me. That'll be four webinars in 7 nights, and I can't wait to do that. So that's it for tonight. And I'm so grateful to you, Wendy, again. And I am going to have this recording up on the internet within 48 hours for us to share with other people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, guys. See you later.